So, Pokemon on the 3DS is a really interesting story because I feel like a lot of the people who think about Pokemon on the 3DS, they don't really think a lot about the highlights and they just think about the lows. They just think about Pokemon X, Pokemon X and Y. That's those games that I didn't like, and it's just because I don't know, they thought it was worse than Black 2 and White 2, because obviously it's going to be worse than that, because what's going to follow up that? And obviously there's a lot of things wrong with it, but I mean, I think going into it, a lot of people had a really positive mindset when you think about Mega Evolution. There were a lot of people who were like, oh my god, this is such a I feel like Pokemon hadn't really seen the gimmick sort of thing yet, and it had really not been done in that way before, and it was really interesting to see how people were getting really hyped over this sort of oh, I can actually get new forms for older Pokemon, that's insane. And I think yes, it did happen in previous ways before, but this was different. It introduced the whole gimmick formula to Pokemon, which in some ways is bad for the whole thing, but I think that it introduces it's not the gimmick formula itself that's bad, it's just some gimmicks are not as good as others. I mean, you also have the leap to 3D. You could say that Pokemon Black 2 and White 2 are technically 3D games, but so much of that game is sprite work, and then the rest of it is 3D. So I mean, if you really wanted to, I guess you could, but it's not. It's really not. This game though is fully 3D, which is amazing. I mean, the 3DS is it's pretty good, honestly. But it's not you're not gonna fucking play Call of Duty on it. So I think that a lot of other people also talk about oh, Pokemon in 3D is also bad. There's so much of the start of Pokemon on the 3DS that people contribute to sort of the downfall of Pokemon, which is really interesting to me. And I think that's also another reason why people hate on Gen 6 a lot too. And it's for these reasons of it was almost their first time going into a lot of different new medium, especially all the different things I've mentioned. Mega's first time having gimmicks, first time in 3D, and you also have a new typing with the fairy type. And I did try and see what people around the time were thinking, and I watched this YouTube video where someone was speculating about the type of Sylveon, because apparently in a reveal trailer they did a trailer where they showed off Sylveon, but they didn't actually show the fairy type yet, and it was a top 5 most likely Sylveon types, and the first 3 were bullshit, and then it was flying type and light type, which is so that is so that time. That is now if anyone was to suggest that there would be a light type in it would be no, we already have a fairy type. But I think at the time people were oh, this is Pokemon, it's got to be this grand, illustrious big thing. And I think a lot of people were also oh, we need something contrasting to the dark type, because we have psychic with dark being immune to psychic, and what about that for another type? And then so that's probably why people went to light, because dark and light. But another thing introduced in X and Y is the communal XP share, which is again one of the not gimmicks, but one of the staples for modern Pokemon now. And I think that like all of these things like get like almost like done in Pokemon X and Y as like their first run through of it. And honestly, for a first job, I think they did pretty good. I think that it really still feels like a Pokemon game when you play it, but it feels fresh and new, and it feels like an adventure that is fun to exist, like a world that is fun to exist in. Now, the story, that's a whole other tale, because that is most of the reason why people shit on this game. The story is not... I think what they were trying to do with this game is they were trying to go for this big, illustrious, grand story with all these, like, elements of, you know, you have, like, 4 different rivals? And I feel like they were kind of just setting themselves up for that one. It was just very, like, they were kind of shooting for the stars. I mean, they were shooting for the stars, but they just kind of made it halfway, and it didn't work out the way that it wanted to. And especially considering that, like I recently replayed Pokemon X recently, and I remember the battle. You battle all 3, Shauna, Tierno, and Trevor on a bridge just before Snowbelle City. And that fight is like, it's literally your last fight with them, and after that they give you Waterfall as like a parting gift, and it's literally like, I felt almost little to none's emotional attachment, and on top of that, it's supposed to be like this hard stuff. Each trainer has 3 Pokemon on their last fight. Like, maybe for like Tierno or Trevor, I get it, but Shauna is like actually a real Pokemon trainer, not like studying the Pokedex or just getting teammates to dance with or whatever the fuck. Like, she's an actual Pokemon trainer. That's also a big gripe with this game. It has so many of the higher trainer types are like, they don't have enough Pokemon. Like, the last gym leader has 3 Pokemon, which is crazy. And the Elite Four have only 4 Pokemon each. Like, it's so... I feel like, in a way, it's so disappointing to see, like, at the end of your journey, it's kind of just like this little breeze, besides Diantha. I mean, Diantha's honestly not... In terms of champions, she's a little easier, but I wouldn't say she's the easiest. I mean, some of her Pokemon can give you a little bit of trouble if you're not careful. I think that a lot of the reason why X and Y kind of is not beloved as much is also because its time in the light was so short. I feel like people didn't really get the time to like appreciate it as much. Like, we got no third game or like sequel games at all, and I think that it really did not help with the criticism online of like, oh, this game's kind of forgetful. I really think that it's a great game as long as you put like as much into it as you're wanting to get out of it. Like, when I play that game, I'm just looking for a good, fun time with a pretty good selection of Pokemon from route to route. That is one of the better things about that game. It has great like selection of Pokemon for you to use, especially earlier on. And it also, like, if you're just going through a casual playthrough of this game, I usually play through this game once a year, once like every year and a half, just because it's my first Pokemon game and I love it to death just because of that. But I can totally see all the flaws in it. Believe me, I've played it so many times. I know that there's flaws. I also think that it deserves a lot of love too. And I also think that love's coming back around, especially with Legends ZA, Legends ZA, whatever it is, being announced. And the minute it got announced, I was like, oh my god, Kalos is finally getting love. And then I saw online like a bunch of people giving it love, and I was like, oh my god, like never in my wildest dreams did I think that fucking Kalos of all places was gonna get love in 2024, 2025. Like, crazy. Then we get to Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire, which I think was a appropriate choice for the time. I think it was, even though I think that maybe a Z version might have been cooler from my personal opinion. That's what I would have liked. Maybe not in favor, but what I would have liked. I think that it's ultimately the better decision to just go with the Soddle. Oh my god, not Soddle. Who is Soddle? Soddle's either evil twin. Oh no. It's going safe with the option of Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire, especially with like these games are we're kind of in like the nostalgia factor, especially at that point. And so like people who have like who grew up with the game are like, yeah, no, I'm totally fine to be playing this game again, especially with like Mega Evolutions and stuff. And then people who have never played the game are like, oh my god, a new Pokemon game is coming out. Like, I mean, that's what I was like as a kid. I was enamored with Pokemon X, and then Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire came out, and I got Omega Ruby, and I was like, this. I like raved about the game for hours and hours and hours, and I played it endlessly as well. I played both of those endlessly. And I mean, I think it just goes to show that with pretty much any Pokemon game, you can sink as much time into it, especially when you're a child and you are like experiencing it for the first time. I think a Pokemon game is really interesting experiencing it for the first time because of the fact that, like, even if it's a bad Pokemon game, I think anyone who is playing a Pokemon game for the first time will fall in love with Pokemon with that game, and so they will always staunchly defend that specific game, and there's nothing you can do about it, but almost like this birthright of people who are like, oh yeah, I was a Hoenn baby, or I was a Sinnoh baby, or whatever, and they're like bound to love that till the day they die, just because it's like their first Pokemon game and they were like introduced to the series through it. And I think that like so much of what the Pokemon on the 3DS is a lot of almost reminiscing, because you have Mega Evolution in X and Y, which is almost all Gen 1 Pokemon. There's a couple that are like, you know, you have your Absol, your Pinsir, Manectric, Garchomp, but for the most part, it is Gen 1 Pokemon. And especially with the Gen 1 starters, like, but then like you get with Gen 3, you get the, you know, Hoenn Mega Evolutions, and it's like, it's a lot of Hoenn stuff, and you get that kind of like major nostalgia factor kicking in that section. And then I know this is just part 1, but I mean, Sun and Moon have Alolan forms, which are literally just different forms of Kanto Pokemon, and it's like, it's so interesting to see this emphasis on, you know, like the nostalgia factor, especially in this generation. I think it's also part of the fact that like especially near the end with like Sun and Moon and Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon, they were they were closing in on like handheld and console markets, and that sort of thing is like they'll try and rope people back in for like the 3DS and then be like, hey, there's this other console too that like you could totally get in on. And I think that they were just trying to get as many Pokemon fans as possible before they launch into this like the biggest step that they've ever taken. I mean, I'm talking about in terms of the Switch and not like Pokemon itself. But I will say it was a big step for Pokemon, especially with like Galar and like you have the wild area and stuff like that. While I have my gripes with Galar, of course, as everyone else does, I do acknowledge it for what it is. And also, you know, you have Paldea, like, again, I love it for what it is. I have my gripes with it, but it's good. So, let's get back on topic. Pokemon Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire were such incredible, almost like time capsules of a game from the past that felt brand new. It truly did feel like a fresh take on this older game. I mean, not even that. It did feel brand new, so it didn't even feel like that. It felt like this is a new experience. Like, when I got that at, like, 9 years old or however old I was like, oh my god, this is just the next Pokemon game. This is not, like, like a remake or something. This is the next one. I think that it shows a lot about the Pokemon franchise on the 3DS as a whole, in that it doesn't feel very nothing feels out of place. I feel like it's all kind of meant to be here, apart from Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon. I'll get to that part too. I think that Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire are great. You know, you have, again, the more megas. They brought back secret bases, which is, I mean, I think of like fucking BDSP and I'm like, oh, so no secret base. They're like, we have secret bases. And then I'm like, oh, I show up at the function and I'm like, oh, where are the secret bases? And they're like, it's right there. And it's like a crumb of secret bases on the plate. And I'm like, oh, okay. And I was honestly never even that into secret bases, but I like could see the appeal. And I remember I did start my own, and me and my brother would play at the same time on our respective games. I had Ruby, he had Sapphire. I had Omega Ruby, he had Alpha Sapphire. And every time I remember I would find a secret base or something, and I think it would be his, because I don't think I made one myself, but I think that like I used to infiltrate his all the time, and so I used to like do the little like stuff that he had in there, and I'd be like, fight me, mister. And I mean, like, they also had like new additions like the Latios Flyover, which is, I think, like a really good replacement for event Pokemon. I think it's a better way to like be like, here's your legendaries, and you can still work for them, but we're not going to do events anymore because events low-key suck ass. And I think that the Latios Flyover really gets you these like experiences that are like breaching the 3D. Like, I feel like with like the genies, when you encounter one of them, there's like a thundercloud, and like you never see that with anything else, and it's just with the genies. And I think that's really unique, and I really like the like world building that they do there, where it's like they make this very specific action in the world to be able to be like, oh, okay, you can go there and go get them right now. And I think like it's such a great gimmick to use it as like using Latios, Latias, like that sort of thing, especially including Megas in that too. Now, I wish there was different forms. I wish they didn't look the fucking same, but that's just a personal point. They probably had to, though, for 3D. No, but it probably wouldn't be that difficult to just render a different 3D model. Whatever. They also, like, introduce Latios / Latias much earlier in the game. I think it's after the 5th gym, which is a very bold choice, but I think it works out, especially because most trainers around this time are, like, close to finalizing their teams, and I think that just adding a Latios or Latias would be, like, still, like, helping out trainers, especially, like, younger ones who are like, oh, I really don't know how to get through the game, and then, like, they can just be, like, burn through the game with, like, a legendary. And so it's like, I mean, there's obviously still gonna be challenges because they're a fucking child, but lastly, I'm gonna talk about the Delta episode because it is just a wildly grand improvement on Ruby and Sapphire. Like, they literally just added a Rayquaza segment for all you Emerald lovers out there. We added a little Rayquaza segment, and then they give Rayquaza a Mega, which is, like, breaks competitive, and they do this whole thing to, like, also get Deoxys. Like, they pull in so many different strings. Like, they introduce Zinnia. They do a lot to rationalize why this is here and why it's created. And it has a lot. It has, you know, like, a good hour of content, just cause. And I really enjoy that the creators behind that put that much time and effort into just adding a little cherry on top at the very end. And I think that it works really well, especially with like, it almost feels like the natural conclusion to everything. From what I remember of the game, it's like a very goofy, like, post-game mission, and I'm like, the entire time I'm, like, watching Professor Cosmo or whatever the fuck he is, like, screaming in the laboratory, just like, we're all gonna die! And I'm like, okay, calm down. And I think that the sort of, like, that sort of thought and creativity that goes into these types of Pokemon games is what I respect most about these types of games, especially from this era. And I think that, like, the creativity can also be seen in X and Y, just in a different way. And I feel like part of the reason why that creativity couldn't be shown through is maybe, like, of time constraints or something like that, or, like, maybe just a lack of being able to make it feel cohesive, because I feel like it really doesn't end up feeling that cohesive when you're going through the actual story. But I think that in the end, it all kind of just ends up being a great first experience for anybody of any age of Pokemon. And I think that if you are to introduce a Pokemon game to anyone of any age for the first time, I think my optimal choice would probably be the 3DS games in terms of the Gen 6 ones. Now the Gen 7 ones, that's what we'll get to in part 2. And also, literally, the Gen 6 games are, like, in my opinion, I really like how they look. I like how I like so much about them. I could go on and on forever about them, but I won't, because I literally already have in this video. So, anyways, I just wanted to make a video about Gen 6, especially corresponding to its time on the 3DS and in relation to other Pokemon games, because I love Pokemon, I love 3DS, and I love everything about that era, especially because I like grew up in it. So this is kind of like my little love letter, but I also critique things, and I also am just yapping for like however long this is. The recording is 33 minutes right now, but I'm sure it's much shorter in post because I took little breaks. Anyways, I plan on coming back to creating content. I know guys, after like, how long has it been? 4 years since my last like speedrun video. I'm not making speedrun videos though anymore. I'm sorry. That Street Fighter speedrun community is literally so dead. So sorry. No, I want to come back to make videos like this and other types of stuff. So if you want to see something, you can comment, suggest. Doesn't mean I'm gonna do it, but I still have control over whatever the fuck I do. But if I like it, I'll be like, that's a really good idea, and I'll steal it for myself. But it works out though, because then you get the content you want, and it's like, it's all good. Oh, also, I have a podcast that I am doing with my best friend in the entire world. Don't know what we're gonna call it yet, but basically they're also the other person who will be on the podcast, which I don't even know if they want me to say their name, so I'm not going to, is also a Pokemon nerd like me. So we will most definitely be talking about Pokemon at some point on the podcast. So stay tuned for that. Because if you liked this video, you will definitely like that. Yeah. That's kind of all I have to say right now. Thanks to my 40 whatever subscribers that just subbed to me off of like, what was it? A Captain Kidd video. Toodles, I guess. Bye-bye.